So we've made our way around the Mediterranean, from Spain to Greece, from the Eastern Mediterranean all the way to Morocco. And we've seen a lot, likely we've learned a lot, but now that we're home, what takeaways, what have we learned really? What can we put to use today that will make our time in the kitchen more satisfying, more enjoyable, and maybe even tastier? Well, the elephant in the room, if you will, is olive oil. Olive oil is pervasive around the Mediterranean, and for good reason. The olive tree thrives in that climate. The calories associated with olive oil have sustained the people of the Mediterranean for thousands of years through hard times. And we're learning today that olive oil is a nutritional powerhouse. There is hardly a fat on the face of the planet as healthy for you as olive oil. So finding ways to move olive oil into your cuisine, I think, is an important idea. Now let me share that for me, I'm an olive oil booster. I love the stuff. I've made my own olive oil. I've consumed untold calories of olive oil, both good and bad. I've traveled around the world to learn about olive oil, and I can honestly say that for me, it took somewhere between 5 and 10 years before I could say I preferred olive oil on my toast in the morning to butter. So, what does that mean to us? Well, it means this, that you have to be active. You need to find a way to understand olive oil in the context of food so that you can make inroads on olive oil, so that it can become part of your culinary life. You can learn to enjoy it and appreciate it faster than I did. Let me give you a couple of ideas. What about breakfast? Well, here is some toast that's just popped up right here. And one of my favorite ways of using olive oil is to get a whole grain bread like this, toast it, and then put a really bitter marmalade on top. And once that marmalade is in place, what it's missing is olive oil, which will provide richness, but it gives marmalade this depth of flavor that it never had before. So marmalade on the bread, and then I drizzle on a really green, pungent, punchy olive oil. And the thing that really sets it off is some good salt. I've got Maldon salt, sort of a flaky Maldon salt right here. And this I have easily once a week. If I'm not enjoying this, I might have something else. It begins with toast. It might be rye toast. That's a favorite in our house. And I take avocado and spread avocado on that bread. And then, again, olive oil. And for me, salt is an important component, but also just a little bit of cracked black pepper. I think that is delicious. And on rye bread, I think this is something you'll go back to again and again. Now, this really speaks to something that I've learned about eating from the Mediterranean. In many countries, most recently for me was Turkey, you sit down to breakfast and you're not looking at a lot of sweet food. Instead, you're looking at savory food. So meats and cheese and tomatoes and peppers and olives and good quality bread. And starting the day with not sweet food, but with savory food is a nice idea. For me, I've discovered I'm not then in the mood to carry on with sweet food all the day, but instead I lean more towards savory food. So tomatoes, olives, avocado, toast, and right here I've got an egg that I cooked in olive oil. And because eggs cook so slowly and so gently, the heat of the pan doesn't drive the volatiles out of the olive oil. So an egg cooked in olive oil is something very different than an egg cooked in butter. I'm going to slide this right onto the plate here. And this simple breakfast savory breakfast is a great way to begin a day. All right, so let's leave breakfast alone. Come on over, and I want to show you a couple of different dishes that I took away from what's gone before in this course. Let's begin with a salad dressing. Now, we've seen a lot of iconic dishes that really define the cultures that they come from. Paella, as an example, is a national dish of Spain. Certainly if you were in Provence on the Mediterranean coast, if you did not eat bouillabaisse, you really didn't travel to Mediterranean France. These iconic dishes are important. What happens is people cobble together food from those ingredients they have close by and available, and little by little, if a group of people continues to eat a dish in preference to other dishes, then in effect what they're saying is this dish has value to us. This is who we are as a people. We're a people who like this dish, and bouillabaisse is a dish just like that. Really, that's how regional food gets its start. The people choosing to eat this over that, and because they're eating this, they're saying that has value to us. Now, bouillabaisse is a big production. I wouldn't cook it for 1 or 2 people. Probably, 6 to 8 to 10 is a better idea. But the flavor profile, the flavor print, if you will, like a fingerprint, is still there, sort of burned into my consciousness. Could I take that flavor profile and put it to work somewhere else? That's what I'm going to try and do. So we're going to take those flavors of bouillabaisse and create a vinaigrette, a simple vinaigrette. Now, you'll recall that our bouillabaisse had tomatoes, and I have tomatoes here, but rather than raw tomatoes like this, the bouillabaisse has them cooked. And I took an idea from the Eastern Mediterranean and even North Africa, Tunisia, and I ember roasted tomatoes, and you can see them here. And what I'm going to do is peel away the worst of the black skin, and then I'm going to take these tomatoes and just chop them up. In this pan that they roasted in, there's a good deal of liquid. Make sure that you don't discard that because it is solid gold. All right, so we'll hold on to that. There's a little piece of skin there, and then we'll just chop these tomatoes up. They should be fairly soft already because they were roasted until the flesh just collapsed. The smell of these ember roasted tomatoes is so much more than just a fresh tomato off the vine. It's deeper, it's richer, and somehow it's more satisfying. And I'm going to take that tomato and just slip it right into our bowl. All these juices are important. And then let's get things cleaned up. And from this point forward, this vinaigrette should be pretty easy to make. When I start with a vinaigrette, I put some mustard in. That helps as an emulsifier. I'm going to put saffron into this vinaigrette just as we put saffron into our bouillabaisse. And if you'll recall, soaking it in a little bit of water is not a bad idea. And so I'm going to put some hot water on there. I'm going to flavor this with garlic. I'm going to add some shallots, which I like in my vinaigrettes. In goes a little thyme. And instead of seasoning just with salt and pepper, I'm also going to add a few pepper flakes just to give it a little punch. You'll recall we put cayenne pepper into our bouillabaisse, so that's not too much of a stretch. I've got some capers here. And those capers, I want to chop just a little bit. In they go. And our saffron is ready to be included. Now for this to become a vinaigrette, we need vinegar, and I've got some red wine vinegar, and we need olive oil. Let me start with 1 part vinegar, maybe a little bit more, and then introduce olive oil. Now, if you think back to the bouillabaisse, there were 2 ingredients that I shared which were sort of important in Provençal cuisine. One of them, we added some orange zest to our fish stock, and so I'm going to add a little bit of orange zest to this vinaigrette. And because I have this orange without its zest any longer, I'm going to just squeeze some orange juice into this vinaigrette. Now, you can taste this and decide how we're coming along, but there's a little something missing. If you'll recall, we added Pernod, or anise-flavored aperitif wine, to our vinaigrette, or to our bouillabaisse, and I want to do the same with the vinaigrette. This is that aromatic hit that is pretty spectacular. Vinaigrettes should always be a little bit aggressive with acid on the palate because they have to flavor other things. They are, after all, a sauce, not a soup, but a sauce. So make sure they're a little bit aggressively seasoned. And I think this is done. I love this vinaigrette on fish, certainly, grilled fish. It's good on that. I love it with shellfish. I like it with poultry. I like it with vegetables. It's kind of an all-purpose dressing, and it keeps very, very well in the refrigerator. Okay, next, I want to move on to brandade. We made a brandade together. You'll recall it was made with salcade and potato, and it was enriched with cream and turned into sort of a mousse-like texture that we browned under the broiler. As much as I love it, I am practical, and I know that not everybody is going to embrace salcade with open arms. But that doesn't mean you can put the recipe on the shelf and forget it. Why not take the idea of brandade and create something new, something a little bit different? So we're going to make a brandade that has potatoes in it, but also celery root and fennel. And I want to infuse some cream here. I want to infuse some cream with garlic and with star anise. So garlic flavored cream, and then we'll introduce some star anise as well. And we'll let that come up to a simmer, and then I'll turn the heat down and let it reduce, maybe reduce by half. It'll get more concentrated, but also the flavors will begin to come out of the garlic, and it won't taste so raw. The garlic will be a little bit softer and more reasonable. I have here potatoes, and there's potato. I have celery root, and we saw that when we were making vitello tonnato, and I have fennel. All of these have been boiled in salted water until they were tender, and then I took them out and I allowed them to steam dry. I want to get rid of most of the excess water so that this doesn't get too soupy. The less water I have in here, the more of this flavorful cream I can add. I'm going to take these vegetables and we'll put them right into a food mill and we'll puree them. This will take all the fibers out. Our cream is just coming up to a simmer, so let me turn it down. Milk and cream loves to boil over, so keep your eye on it. Don't let it take you by surprise. Okay. So once all that's left in your food mill is the fiber from the fennel, then we can move the food mill aside, and here is the basis of our brandade. Now, here our cream is probably halfway reduced, and I just want to taste it. I'm even going to add a little bit more star anise, and we'll season it with salt, and we'll season it with some pepper. Now, if you'll recall, when we made the brandade, we pureed, after having poached the salt cod, we pureed it with the potatoes and garlic, and we added cream. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to add some cream. And we'll stir that in. And I would just caution you not to be too overzealous with the cream. This should be a mousse-like consistency, but it should not turn into soup. So be a little bit careful there. All right. We'll stir in a little bit more. We want to enrich these potatoes and other vegetables, celery root, fennel. You can use a little bit more salt. And then I'm going to brighten it with lemon juice. And then finally, just to give it some dimension and some visual appeal, I'm going to add some chopped parsley as well. And this is ready to go. I'm going to mound it here into a small plate, and you could serve it warm. I like to eat it room temperature. Sometimes I will swirl just like this. Oftentimes I will drizzle just a little bit more cream over the top. I have some toasts here that we're going to serve it on. And so I'll tuck those around the edge. And there you have a brandade of celery root and fennel side by side with our vinaigrette that tastes of bouillabaisse. And just to remind you, don't forget that olive oil is entirely appropriate for breakfast, whether you have a savory breakfast like this one or something a little bit sweet. So it'd be unfair for me to make this delicious vinaigrette, this roasted tomato saffron vinaigrette, and not show you something to do with it. So that's what this segment is going to be all about. I've decided to put it on chicken, and we're going to get some chicken cooking here. I've got a pan on the heat, and I've got what's known as airline chicken breasts. You're probably familiar with them. They take their name from the fact that this is what the airlines used to serve way back when. Now it's peanuts. But salt and pepper. And in a hot pan, we're going to introduce some olive oil. And when that oil smiles back at me, I'm going to take these chicken breasts and put them into the pan skin side down, or what I think of as presentation side. So while the pan is clean, I put them in with the skin side down so that this side that ultimately I'm going to present will be nicer looking. Lay it into the pan away from yourself so that you don't splash hot oil. Olive oil is certainly healthy for you, but not when it's burning hot. So once these are in the pan, we can reduce the heat slightly and let those brown on the first side, and then I'll flip them over and we'll cook them a little bit on the second side as well. Now, what are we going to serve with this chicken beyond this vinaigrette? Well, you'll recall when we were in Provence, we made artichokes baragoule, braised artichokes in white wine with olive oil and aromatic vegetables. And I'd like to serve these artichokes, which I had left over, with this chicken. And I think it would taste great with this vinaigrette. So we'll set those aside. And one of the lessons that I take away from studying Mediterranean cuisine is that they enjoy everything. There's weeds that are turned into food. And if there's anything that could be repurposed, they will repurpose it. So look here. I've got the braising liquid that these artichokes were cooked in. There's quite a bit of it. And I recognize a lot of really good quality olive oil, white wine, herbs, garlic, and then all the savor of these wonderful vegetables. It would be a shame to throw that out. I'm just going to taste it really quick, and this is sort of the litmus test. If it tastes good, why not use it? And so we're going to make a salad dressing from this, and I'll show you how to do that. Sort of a warm salad dressing with goat cheese. Let's see how these chicken breasts are coming along. So they've got some nice color on the first side. And I'm going to flip them over and we'll cook them on the second side. Now, we're going to finish this dish in the oven, so they don't have to be cooked all the way through. And the nice thing about this is that we can bring it to this point and then shortly before dinner, just pop the pan into the oven and we'll finish it. And I'll show you that in just a little bit. But let's get started with this vinaigrette. I have a pan, it's a little bit warm, and I'm going to put the braising liquid right into that pan, and we'll bring it up to a boil. It's probably not assertively flavored enough to become a vinaigrette just yet, but we can fix that. We're going to fix it by adding a little bit of thyme, a little bit more herb, and I'm even going to put a branch or two in there, and adding a little bit of vinegar. I'm going to make sure that there's salt and pepper in here. The chicken in the back, I'm going to turn that pan off and just let it coast for a while. The residual heat of that pan will cook it about as far as I want. Let's allow this braising liquid to simmer for just a second and the flavor of the thyme make its way into that broth. Here's the salad that we're going to put this dressing on, and I'll just talk briefly about it. This is going to be a warm dressing, and because it's a warm dressing, greens that can withstand a little bit of heat is not a bad idea. Things like frisée or escarole. I've got some Belgian endive, radicchio, and tucked in here as well, I decided to see what was best and brightest at the market. So I have some asparagus tips that I've added, and I thought that some sliced radishes would be a nice addition. Not just from a flavor perspective, but from a color perspective. So our salad is there and ready to go. Now you can see that this braising liquid has come up to a simmer. I've tasted it. I'm happy with the flavor. I'm going to take and do something that they do in French cuisine called monter au beurre. They take a sauce and they mount it with butter. They emulsify it with butter. But I'm not going to use butter. I'm going to use an ingredient that you would find in Provence. I'm going to use goat cheese. And I'll tell you, the first time I did it, this was a little bit of a crapshoot. I wasn't sure that this was going to work, but when I made it, it actually worked marvelously well. So have your base simmering, and then we're going to introduce goat cheese and just stir it into the pot. My fear was that this might break, that it might come apart, and the cheese would turn gummy and the oil would float to the top. But I got to tell you, I was pleasantly surprised. The dressing got creamy, and just to play devil's advocate, I brought it up to a boil to see if I could make it break, and it would not break. So I was a believer. You want to add enough goat cheese so that you're happy with the flavor, but also so that you're happy with the texture. So it should become a little bit viscous, the way you would expect a salad dressing to be viscous. You know, just to make a believer out of you, I'm going to turn the heat up and we'll let this come to a boil, and you'll see that it behaves very, very well. We've got a little bit of work to do in terms of seasoning this. The flavor of the goat cheese is there, and it's such a perfect complement to all of the flavors that were already in the braising liquid of the artichokes. If you have a tremendous amount of braising liquid, far more than you need for making dressing, you might consider reducing it and concentrating the flavors a little bit ahead of time so that you don't make more dressing than you actually need. But if you see, this is boiling here, and it's behaving very, very well. All right, so that dressing is done now. I've got a little bit of leftover goat cheese, so what I want to do is just put it in little lumps about the size of a garbanzo bean or an olive right into the salad, and they'll stay behind to garnish the salad. All right, it's time for us to build the rest of this dish. I'm going to take these chicken breasts out of the pan. I'm going to begin to warm these artichokes just slightly in the same pan. And I'm going to put a few greens in here as well, and just start the process of wilting these greens down, just so that this can be a complete meal. This is a little bit of escarole and some chard that I had on hand. I thought it might look nice if there was some greenery tucked in among the artichokes. As the moisture comes off of these vegetables, all the fond or the essence of chicken that is stuck to the pan will mingle with these vegetables and just make it a richer dish. Already these greens are beginning to wilt down. They don't take very long to cook. And what I want to do is take some of this greenery and tuck it in around the chicken. Likewise, the artichokes. I want the chicken to be uppermost so that the skin can continue to brown and crisp up. These little carrots that the artichokes were braised with create beautiful little pops of color in this pan. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it into the oven. Now this chicken is partially done. I would say within 15 or 20 minutes, this dish, the chicken will be cooked all the way through and all the vegetables will be warm. So into the oven it goes at about, let's say 375 degrees. It's been about 15, 20 minutes. You want to check to make sure that the chicken is cooked all the way through, but I think it looks pretty nice. And because we have a warm salad, I don't want to dress that until after this is ready. So here's our salad. I've got our dressing, and I'm going to put a little bit of this warm dressing right over the salad. We'll toss this all together. You know, this reminds me very much of ranch dressing, sort of buttermilk ranch. It's kind of a creamy dressing. Don't make it too thick. I think that would be a mistake. And here we'll transfer some of this dressing over, or this salad over. And just for a fun little garniture, I'm going to take some of the fennel tops, and they are so feathery and delicate, I think they lend a really nice quality to salads. There is our salad, a little bit of parsley over our chicken, and then here is our dressing. This is the roasted tomato saffron vinaigrette. And I've worked so hard making those chicken breasts nice and crispy and golden. I don't want to put sauce over the top, but after they've come from the pan and maybe you slice them, then we can serve a little bit of this vinaigrette on the side, and you can enjoy it on the vegetables as readily as on the chicken. So this is really cooking that I recognize, but I also recognize that it's inspired by the flavors and the techniques and when we talked about sherry, when we were still in Spain and looking at tapas, I talked a lot about sherry, and we looked primarily at the aperitif wines. But there's a couple of dessert wines that I mentioned, among them PX, or short for Pedro Ximénez. This is a wine that's vinified from grapes of the same name. But when they harvest the grapes, when they harvest the Pedro Ximénez, they take those grapes and they allow them to dry in the sun and raisin for about a week before they vinify those grapes into wine. And what it does is it gives you this wonderful, rich, raisiny wine. It's fortified to about 22% alcohol, and you taste that nuttiness that's indicative of all the other sherries that have gone through oxidative aging. But probably my favorite way to enjoy this wine is just poured over a little bit of ice cream. Vanilla ice cream, for example. So I went to the store to buy vanilla ice cream and immediately bumped into 3 other flavors, almond, pistachio, and coffee. And I thought, boy, this would be great on all of those. And suddenly, visions of ice cream sundaes are dancing in my head. And I had to stop for a second and remind myself that we are studying the Mediterranean. And sweets look very different in the Mediterranean. Oftentimes they finish a meal with fruit, dried fruit, fresh fruit. And if it's pastries or a sweet like this, the portions are small. So I decided to break this up into 4 separate desserts. And what I'm going to do is pour a little bit of this Pedro Ximénez sherry over each. First over the vanilla, then over the almond, a little bit over the pistachio, and finally some over the coffee. We could leave it like that, but I think just so that people can keep it all straight, over the pistachio, let's put just a few pistachios, toasted with a little bit of salt on them. Over the roasted nut ice cream, I'm going to put some almonds. And finally here, I've got some coffee beans that have been candied, first coated in chocolate and then cocoa powder. And I thought that might be a nice addition here. With the vanilla ice cream, maybe just a cookie. There you have a very simple dessert that takes advantage of PX, or Pedro Ximénez, and ice cream which you maybe have in your freezer already. I hope you've enjoyed this trip around the Mediterranean as much as I have. When I cook some of these dishes, it's like revisiting old friends that I haven't seen in a while. Along the way, I learn things, and hopefully you do too, about ingredients, about techniques, and about traditions. All of that information can make your time in the kitchen more satisfying, and the food you put on the table a little healthier, but certainly more delicious.